Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to be going through the 2019 State of Account-Based Marketing report that Terminus, Flip My Funnel, Sigster, and Discover.org put together. I have with me Derek, the CMO from Terminus, and Eric, a senior analyst from TOPO. They'll be presenting a few of the data points that we discovered to help you strategize throughout your 2020 calendar year. And with no further ado, why don't you begin?
All right. Thank you, Joel. This is Derek, Voice Association here. As Joel mentioned, I'm the head of marketing here at Terminus. And I'm joined by Eric Wittlake, who's one of our great partners in the analyst community at TOPO. And we've been working with Eric for years on this thing called account-based marketing. So excited to have him on the broadcast here to share with you some of the observations from TOPO's perspective, and then dive into what we found from all of you, frankly, in the State of ABM report that we ran towards the end of last year and have compiled early this year and are releasing along with this webcast. From that, we'll jump into what folks are doing with this and what we see within our customer base. We have almost 1,000 customers now at Terminus that are in some state of account-based marketingness, and sharing with you guys how leading companies have been going down this path, both from our perspective and from what Eric and the team at TOPO are seeing as well. And then just a little fun with what we see as kind of takeaways and predictions as we, as Joel put, head into the calendar 2020, and what's coming in this industry, gleaned from the data we got in the report and also the qualitative and quantitative stuff that we're seeing within the customer base. And we'll wrap it up with live Q&A and discussion. So as we go through the prepared material here, I would just encourage you all as participants to go ahead and log questions in the chat box. We'll capture those and respond to them if we can. Please challenge us at the end of the prepared materials. So let's jump in. I've already kind of introduced myself. Just as a little bit further background, I've been at Terminus for about 1.5 years now. I've spent several decades at this point in B2B sales and marketing roles in the technology space, and have definitely seen the industry evolve from no technology to lead-based technology to now account-based technology. And it feels like we're finally in a place where marketing and sales are more inclined to be speaking the same language. And I'm excited to be part of a company that's in the middle of that, not only from how we run marketing at Terminus within my team and our go-to-market, but also working with so many smart, leading account-based marketers out there who have pivoted from a lead-based world to an account-based world. So that's me, but I'm also, as I mentioned, joined by Eric, and I'm going to turn over the next couple minutes for him to run through what he's seeing at TOPO and then jive that up with what we're seeing in the data. So I'll turn it over to you, Eric, and let you just kind of give folks a backdrop on who you are, and then jump into some of the TOPO observations.
Awesome, thanks, Derek. Yeah, my name's Eric Wittlake. I've been a market analyst at TOPO now for about 3.5 years, focused on account-based as a go-to-market. But that's a bug that actually bit me now probably about a decade ago. So it's been a piece of my focus and my area of interest for much longer than that. I joined TOPO. We're a research and advisory firm, and we work with high growth companies. By the way, those are a lot of the companies that were the early adopters in account-based. And so that's given us at TOPO the opportunity to collect a fair bit of data. I'll share some of that with you today, as well as to get a lot of perspective and anecdotes and the stories behind what is really working when people go to adopt an account-based approach. So I'll go ahead and dive in and share some of that. But before we do, I want to get us started with just a real basic definition, because I found consistently we need to get started with getting on the same page. So when we talk about account-based, what do we mean at TOPO? What do we mean in our research? We mean the coordination of a valuable and personalized experience. That's how we become really, really relevant, delivered across all the different functions of our organization that a customer or prospect may engage with. This isn't something that can happen just through marketing. We have to have the entire customer-facing portion of the organization involved. And we do that in order to engage and to convert, to progress the state of relationship we have with a set of target accounts that we've all agreed on ahead of time. We're trying to get marketing and sales to do this together. We can't do it unless we know who we're doing it with. So this has to begin with actually defining our account list and who we're focused on. So why does that matter so much today? It matters because it's working. When we look at today's early adopters, the folks that got started and have established this as a go-to-market, across the board, they're saying that this performs better than the traditional go-to-markets that they've deployed. That doesn't mean people are moving to 100% account-based, but it means that they're increasing their investment, they're doubling down their focus. This is becoming a core focus and initiative for them. So just how much better? Here, sure, a lot of things are better, but how much? When companies first get started, they see an increase in ACV of about a third. Deal sizes go up by a third just because we've implemented focus. What I love about this stat is that benefit happens almost immediately. This is a really quick turn benefit that companies see. Now, the real eye-popping statistic is that our win rates improved by nearly 50%. But that takes time. So if you're just getting started, please don't forecast a 50% improvement in win rate for next year. You probably won't achieve it. But what we do see is as companies adopt an account-based approach across a greater portion of the customer lifecycle, and they refine that approach, many companies are seeing over 12 to 18 to 24 months, they're seeing improvements in their win rates approaching 50%. That's a big, big difference.
Yeah, that's amazing, Eric. We've seen similar stats in our install base, and I'm just interested because the ACV piece is, I think, probably a lot of that is down to just smarter targeting. Picking better fit accounts who see higher value in your solution, who are more likely to spend a greater share of wallet on what you're providing. How do you see companies doing that targeting today? And do you think I'm right on that being, the major contributor to ACV increase and why it comes so quickly?
Yeah, why it comes so quickly has a lot to do with, we know where we should be able to have bigger deals. Right. Let's focus.
Yeah.
Hey, guess what? As a business, we actually know where our bigger customers should come from. Right. Not surprising, a little bit reassuring. But the other side of that we also see is when we restrict our focus, and that rolls through into the way sales operates. We see a lot of companies that have traditionally had an enterprise focus. They've traditionally had, mid six-figure deals, for instance, and they adopt an approach where they're trying to focus further on the best set. And now sales is actually working to build larger opportunities, to get more people, more groups within the organization on board and have a greater scope for those deals. So we see a lot, particularly in ones that are already enterprise focused. It's not necessarily that these are places where there would be bigger deals. Yeah. Oftentimes it's because it's places where there would be better fit. Right. And that focus is allowing them to build it into larger deals.
Got it. Makes sense.
So I like this. To me, the most important thing, though, is actually here, how efficient this funnel is. Yeah. If I take my old math, 1% lead to close conversion rate. Yeah. Sometimes that was actually aggressive, but it made math for somebody like me really, really simple to do live and on the spot. Yep. It meant that to get to a decent volume of business, we needed a really big market we were going after. We weren't going to get leads from every company in our market. That meant that we needed this big market, and that didn't give us the luxury of focus. This is very different. I start with my target accounts, and companies are closing business with more than 10% of their target accounts. Yeah. That is what gives me the luxury of focus. Because I have that kind of conversion rate, I actually have the ability and the luxury of being able to say, I'm going to focus my energy and my activity here and get more result for my business from that space.
It's interesting to see this, Eric, because we focus a lot on this even at Terminus, and we're practitioners just like we're were vendors in this space, and going through the 2020 plan was trying to optic on how do we drive a higher close rate within each of our segments. And actually, our data is somewhere between 10 and 15% depending on the segment. So it's kind of neat to see it aligned with what you're seeing in the market. At least I know we're in the right ballpark. So that's good.
Awesome, great results.
Yeah.
I don't think it should come as any surprise on the back of this. It's working better, deal sizes are larger, we're winning more often, we have so much more efficiency in what we can bring out of our market that we're looking to increase our spend. And across the board, just to take a real rough average, companies that are having a lot of success with their account-based efforts, even if it's only from their initial pilots, seeing budget increases from those companies of 30 to 50% in the following year is not at all uncommon. Seeing budget increases, sometimes they get to 100 to 200% that's happening as well. A whole nother discussion that this could spark for us, Derek, at another time, but I think some of what you're going to share is going to give us some insights into this, is the unique challenges that come then from scaling the investment in account-based at
100%.
that degree.
100%.
With that, I'm going to hand it to you to share some of what you've drawn out of your data as well.
Yeah, no, glad to. I think that's a great backdrop for kind of how you guys are seeing your clients drive value from shifting to account-based, and kind of starting to touch on maybe some of the challenges they're experiencing as they scale them up. So I'll dive into the survey results, and look, guys, on the webinar, there's a full survey report that you can digest at your leisure, so to speak, but I'll touch on some of the highlights from it. We run this every year. I believe this is our 4th year running the State of Account-Based Marketing research report. This year we surveyed nearly 250 practitioners, marketing practitioners out there. Not all of them are account-based marketers. So because we partnered with folks to execute the survey, we cast a fairly broad net, but certainly more inclined to be account-centric given the nature of the audiences we interact with. They came from, as you can see from the chart, a lot of different size companies, primarily kind of tech software heavy, as you can also see. But I would just say qualitatively, we're seeing the industry open up a bit as more mainstream industries and companies start to adopt account-based. So this is, even from last year, a shift to being more diverse than pure kind of tech software centric. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the full report as you can, but we'll touch on the highlights in the next couple slides. First of all, I think this is not that surprising, but also it's important to see that the data supports what we believe here, which is that companies that have higher confidence in ABM as measured by their ability to be successful with it, in the yellow here, the ones that are 4, 5, 6, very, very confident in how they're doing, are running, bigger, broader account-based programs. So, what we've seen within our customer base is, the ones that struggle are the ones that are very channel specific or very marketing only in the way that they're rolling out account-based, and where customers are doing account-based in broader, bigger initiatives that incorporate sales channels and marketing channels, that look at it as more of a practice versus a project, have a higher degree of success rate. So, when you're thinking about, how do I put my toe in the water for ABM, it's probably more important that you put maybe your leg or your torso in the water, not just your toe, if you want to be successful. And you're thoughtful and practical about how you're going to do it across multiple touch points inside your company. So that's takeaway number one, or point number one we saw in the data. We also saw that, while it's important to be big and broad, so to speak, from the prior slide, it's not all of it. And demand gen and account-based marketing need to live in complement of each other. And so, more and more companies are recognizing that. And while some of them are doing it larger than others, they still are doing both kind of traditional marketing with account-based marketing in in one organization. And I think we'll see some additional results from that when we look at some of the technology later in the survey.
I want to double down on that real quickly and just make an overarching statement. If you're adopting an account-based approach, it should be incremental to what you're already doing about 99.9% of the time. There are a few edge case companies that are in a good position to say my entire go-to-market should become exclusively account-based, but they're very rare, far and few between. This is typically an incremental approach to address opportunities or weaknesses that we have today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what we see as well, Eric. And I think also just figuring out how you tuck some of your inbound and outbound programs into the framework you're using for ABM is really, really important as well. You know, the KPIs that, and you touched on this also, Eric, in your piece, that you think about with how you're measuring ABM are really critical. And the companies that are successful, you can see from the big three metrics that they're opticking on for how they're looking at account-based success. None of these mention leads, right? All of them, I think, any salesperson would understand directly how that impacts them, right? Pipeline revenue and how well we're getting our target accounts to engage with us, which is what sales thinks about every single day. And while we've coached them over the years to think about leads, that doesn't really align with what they're trying to do in their jobs. And so the successful companies have made this pivot from leads and volume, and to your mathematical move the decimal point math, Eric, you know, 1% conversion rates, to how well am I engaging my target accounts? How well are those accounts getting into our pipeline and weighted pipeline? And are we turning them into customers? And at what value are we turning them into customers? So, you know, it is important as you go down this path that you make sure that the constituents around your marketing team, who are generally going to be leading this initiative in concert with your sales team, understand how you'll measure it, and the new measurement requirements of being account centric. And I think the inverse is also true. If you're going to measure account centric in your traditional funnel metrics, the volume is not going to support what the other channels might be able to deliver, but it's a quality over quantity game, which I think everybody agrees is the right game to be in. And then lastly, you know, from a tech stack perspective, and again, you know, Terminus, we're an account-based platform that provides, you know, important technology across all of these capabilities, frankly. You know, how you analyze identifying the right accounts, and how you analyze success, how you drive digital display and engagement in people's browsers so they understand your brand promise, how you identify them and present personalized intelligence to them on your digital properties as they show up, and how you push that intelligence into your sales channels so they can be, you know, aware of how this account is progressing, is all stuff that we do in our platform. But again, we are also a practitioner, and we work with practitioners every day. And, you know, the ones that are successful with account-based initiatives, by and large, have these capabilities in their tech stack. And that's not to say you have to have it, but the data does kind of scream at me here to say that if you're going to be successful, you're probably going to have these capabilities, because you need to be smart about which accounts you pick and how you scale. You need to use data to drive that decisioning. You need to use programmatic ways to reach those audiences where they're currently spending time. And you need to identify them at that account level with that intelligence as they interact with you, so that you can present the right content to them, and you can have your sellers have the right conversations with them in order to move that account through the process. And again, you know, the data is pretty indicative here on the probability of you being successful with having these capabilities in your organization. So those are kind of the highlights. Again, I'd encourage you to dive in if you want more detail in the report. There's plenty of it in there. But let's bubble that back out, Eric, if you don't mind, and let's talk about how are some of the top organizations performing as it relates to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going to highlight here 3 things that stood out to us in the data that we collect about the best performing organizations and that we see in the practices that they've actually implemented. First is what I set up in that definition. We have to start knowing who we're focused on. This is the single biggest difference between the best performing subset of companies that we surveyed and the balance of the survey audience that we had.
Right.
How confident are you that you have an ICP that lets you identify the best fit and highest value companies for your organization? These numbers are stark. Best performing organizations, more than 80% said, yeah, that's me. Everybody else, barely over 40%. This is a huge, stark difference. And it's because that is such an important starting point. If we're not confident that we got that right, you start to have trouble just 4-6 weeks in, and the alignment you thought you had falls apart. We have to put the time and investment both into identifying it and then into driving the alignment that we need around it. By the way, when I think of characteristics of what makes for a good ideal customer profile or ICP, one of the 5 characteristics I use is we all agreed. Because I don't care how good it is, if we're still fighting about it and don't agree on it, it's not good. So that is absolutely critical to what we're doing. The next thing that we see is how we invest in our staff. We see that the best organizations are naming a specific leader for their account-based initiatives. Now, when I say that, what do I look for? You might have a small team. You go, well, I can't have somebody who is, doing this 100% because my team's not that big. Okay. What I look for is I look for someone in the organization who cannot be successful in the eyes of the organization by focusing on and doing well in everything else, but not doing well in the account-based role. This can't be someone's 4th hat. They can still have a couple other hats, but it's got to be a big enough piece of their role that they're not successful if they're not driving this forward. And that's so important when we're adopting an account-based approach and we're talking about, like Derek showed, we're not focused on leads as a primary metric. We're changing the way we do our budgeting and forecasting and how we align resources. This isn't just having somebody there to run the programs. This is having somebody there to help us drive those kinds of changes through the organization. Because I just mentioned measurement, let's go ahead to the last thing that we see here. We see that companies are establishing an account-based specific approach to their measurement, starting with how many accounts we have and looking at the results that we then are achieving from each one of those accounts. When it comes to planning and forecasting in particular, please split this between prospect and customer. When it comes to the primary metrics that you're using, look at the number of accounts that you've moved. It's awesome that you open 10 different opportunities with one really big account, but long-term for health of your business, I'd much rather see you actually get a great start with 10 and have the opportunity to grow from that base of 10 new additional accounts from your target account list. So make our first set of metrics be off of the number of accounts that we've progressed to each point.
Yeah, I think that's super critical. And actually it speaks to your prior slide too, with why having, a center of gravity for kind of getting people's buy-in and understanding of this is so critical, because it is just a different way. It's not obtuse, right? It's actually fairly logical, but it requires people to pause and understand it, and having somebody who's, capable of walking people through that journey is just so critical to success, I think.
Yeah, fully agree. It's back over to you, Derek, for a couple takeaways to start to wind us down.
Yeah, let's get into what we think we need to do about this, right? That's probably, people are dying for that information now. Like, come on, guys, what are we gonna do? I mean, I think you touched on the first one a lot, Eric, with just this conversation around how are we going to measure this lock-in point, which you made, which is super critical, which is we all agreed right? And I love that kind of way of thinking about it, because the data's never going to be perfect, but we're going to do the best we can, then we're going to lock in and we're going to go execute, and we're not going to revisit decisions we've already made. And having that kind of united front between sales and marketing, and I always talk about this as being integrated versus aligned. Aligned implies that I'm going to do something, give it to you, and you're going to do something. Integrated implies we understand what we're going to do as a team, and we're going to execute, lead, follow lead as appropriate across the cycle. So that's super important. Hiring the right people comes back again and again, and the survey brought this to light, not surprisingly, but it's always great to see that this is one of the key blockers and key challenges that companies have as they're scaling ABM or scaling account-based go-to-market or transforming to account-based, as we like to talk about it with our customers. So, human capital is the most precious capital. And frankly, if you're embarking on this journey, not only are you doing the right thing for your company, but I think you're doing the right thing for your career. I think back to, 10, 12 years ago, when the people who really got in and understood how marketing automation could work were much more set up to have successful, job progressions internally or externally, as that market just kind of blossomed and became, kind of the pervasive thing that people needed talent to do. We see the same thing happen with account-based, and the survey really screamed that at me when we pulled the data together. And then lastly, this concept of tiering ABM programs is really important. We do that internally at Terminus, and we actually just released a blog on it. So if you want to read more about it, you can meander over to our website if you haven't already and read our blog on Terminus. But we do a lot of thoughtful segmenting on how we're going to approach our overall market from a TAM perspective, to how we're going to adhere to our ICP with segments that we push into our growth markets and our enterprise markets, to even the micro segments that we're going to launch specific account-based programs at for various data signals or business reasons that we're putting into play. So this concept of tiering your program so that you're spending the most of your resources and cycles and budget and time on the accounts that best fit what you're trying to do and best fit the solution you're bringing to them. So those are three quick kind of best practices from what we're seeing kind of in the market as you guys think about what you're doing within your company and within your teams. And then I think lastly, we've got what are some of the trends? So let's talk about these individually. This concept of full funnel and full market account-based transformation is something we hear again and again from our customers, and it actually was one of the things that really drove us rapidly through the acquisition of Sigster, which is an email signature marketing company. We see so much of the activity in account-based success happening below the top of the funnel, and account-based is really now a full funnel activity that happens across multiple market segments, but also through the entire life cycle of customers becoming interested in what you do, to buying what you do, to becoming retention, expansion, upsell candidates for what else you can do for them. And so much of that lives in employee email that unlocking that channel for us was critical, because we hear so many more of our customers moving to, as Eric showed on his slide, this concept of account-based for prospect and account-based for pipeline progression or for customer marketing. So that's a kind of a huge thing we see kind of just continuing to occur heading into this year. Also, this concept of account-based tech kind of colliding with the general purpose demand gen activities. And I know we see this happening within our customer base. Obviously we're a technology vendor in the space too, but account-based technology really feels like it's becoming more and more the center of gravity for lots of stuff, and people are trying to figure out how they tuck their traditional lead gen activities into an account-centric world, and we see that kind of playing out through the course of this year. Eric, I don't know how you guys see it at TOPO, similarly or different.
Yeah, I'd really like to jump in on that one. I think this is something I've actually been saying should happen for a couple of years now, but it's we're starting to now see it in the data and in the practices a lot more often. I'll take account-based advertising as a good example. There's so many things that I do from a marketing perspective, from program design, segmentation, that I can't apply generally available third-party marketing to for segmentation. For instance, I'm going to run a program that's a competitive takeaway. Okay, I've got 700 accounts that I've identified that are going to be included in that program. If I want to use advertising as a piece of that, then I actually need an account-based advertising solution. I might not have an account-based strategy overall. I might not have a target account list, but we're seeing people do that. You mentioned going across the full life cycle. If I want to differentiate between customers and prospects, or between my prospects more broadly and current open opportunities, that again is something that I'm going to have to execute against specific accounts. And so the technology and also the skill set that we've developed over the last few years has actually let us take more of that ability into our broader demand gen activity.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it actually leads into the last point, which is this, CMO scorecard reimagined. I don't want to use the term CMO too broadly here. It's really, marketing leadership scorecard. How are we measuring the efficiency of our marketing teams and dollars we're spending is becoming reimagined. I mean, when I think about, even just, again, not to be too narcissistic and think only about my job, but when I do think about what we do internally and how I share what marketing's doing, align it with our CRO, talk about it with our executive team, share it with other people in the company. This account-centric way of looking at our go-to-market is, has been a space that has been underserved. I think not many CMOs feel like they have the core technology ability to look at an account-centric view of how they're progressing demand gen broadly. And I think when we look at it now, it's within our target accounts, those metrics we talked about earlier. How many of our target accounts are engaged? How are we measuring engagement? From that engagement, how well are we converting people who are somewhere in the top of our funnel to people who are real opportunities? So pipeline and weighted pipeline. And how do I look at revenue results? And how am I managing and measuring the channels that touch those accounts, not those individuals, but those accounts through that life cycle, so I can invest more in the touches that work versus the ones that don't seem to move the needle. So again, I think this is a big one for 2020, is helping marketing leaders provide a better, more account-centric scorecard for what they're doing and how they're progressing business metrics that sellers would understand, not just lead metrics. And I think that'll be something that continues to kind of be a pervasive thought in this calendar year. So those are the three kind of trends we see. I think that brings us to the conclusion. I'm excited to hear some of the questions you guys have. I've seen a couple of them start to come through in the chat window here. This is a formal ask for any other questions you haven't surfaced. Go ahead and surface it now. I do want to thank Eric for joining me on this webcast. He's a busy guy. TOPO talks to a lot of customers, so I know we had to pull him out of customer-facing stuff to spend some time with us, but we appreciate that. And I thank you guys all for spending the time and hopefully submitting some questions, and I'm looking forward to getting to those questions. Right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Joel so he can close us out and then start to prompt Eric and I with some of your tough questions that you guys have been surfacing throughout the presentation here.
We've got a couple questions coming in. I'm going to send this one on over to Derek. How will direct mail play into the future of ABM?
Well, thanks, Joel. I think, direct mail is a really important piece of account engagement from what we see as practitioners at Terminus, frankly, and working with our partners like PFL and Sendoso. It's applicable later in the funnel. Typically, it's an expensive channel to engage on, but once you have an understanding, I think leveraging a direct outreach with a thoughtful, relevant piece of content and otherwise through direct mail can help just create a level of interaction and willingness to kind of take the next step. But I would also say that I think direct mail needs to be done in a thoughtful way, showing that you've got the right understanding of the account, and if it's dimensional or gift oriented, it's relevant to your brand or the challenge or what you know about the company or the customer. But very powerful impressions can be made with direct mail from what we've seen within our business and what we see within our customer base as well.
Great.
I'll jump in real quickly on that one as well, Joel. So when I look at kind of formula for a program, I always want something that's really high impact, that's going to get people's attention, and I want to then follow that up with things that give a great opportunity to respond. We see direct mail today as one of the primary things people use in that high impact role. If you measure just the direct, somebody responded via URL or number or whatever on a direct mail piece, it doesn't look that great. When you look instead at how much better the response is that your SDR, for instance, gets to the follow-up emails or phone calls that they have in the next 24, 48, 72 hours after that direct mail piece is received, you see a really, really big impact. And so that's why we look for that combination of the high impact as well as the one-to-one outreach that becomes the direct response channel for the people that receive the direct mail piece. And it's a very high performing piece in many programs when used in that way.
Great. It seems like some people are having difficulty hearing the audio at this time. We are recording this webinar, so if you can no longer hear us, we will send along the recording of the Q&A at the end. But we can go ahead and keep going answering questions. Derek, how do you figure out the best use case for every piece of your tech stack since so many ABM tools overlap?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm sure Eric has some thoughts on this too, living in the space and talking to lots of practitioners and vendors alike. There is definitely, the concentric circles are overlapping at an increasing rate across what different pieces of technology can do. I think, customers need to be thoughtful about what they're trying to do from a business perspective, and then, leverage their technology appropriately versus the other way around. But I would also just add, I do think that we are, the pendulum always swings from kind of, best in class tools to more common integrated capabilities. And I think we've swung way over to the lots of purpose-built small tools, and we're swinging back towards, technology having a little bit more broad capability, being more valuable to tie some of this stuff together at the data and interaction level. My quick take, but Eric, I'm sure you probably have a few thoughts as well.
Yeah, let me add just one thing to that. When you have a lot of things, you have a lot of options, potentially that you already own. When we say, let's start with your strategy, let's start with your program, let's let that drive the technology. Don't forget to make the technology decision when there's multiple options within your stack, not just on the feature and function, but on the process, because we need to be building in a way that we are more repeatable and scalable. When you have the success that I know you will almost all have, the next question is, how do I do 3 times as much of it? And so we need to pick those solutions that not just work for the strategy, but also make it repeatable and scalable.
Great. We have another question. How can we be more efficient in creating content for ABM and avoid having to divert a large chunk of marketing budget to content creation versus media spend?
I mean, I can
take that, Derek.
Yeah, I mean, I can make a few comments there. I think it's, content is always a challenge, just speaking from experience. I think you want to have content, especially when you move to an account-centric approach, that's as relevant to an account, a specific account, and what you know about that account as you can. But I also think there's creative ways to focus on the right content, the right message, and not be oriented on some kind of journey you're trying to push the individual or account through, and make your content a little bit more scalable across multiple accounts, because I think there is a very different very different set of requirements and approaches that you would take when you're running a one-to-one kind of ABM effort versus a one-to-many. And wherever you're looking for scale and growth, I think one-to-many is required. And just being thoughtful about staying true to a great content experience and then using that intelligently and knowing where it fits in the customer journey in your one-to-many account-based approach is the right way. I think a lot of times content gets created based around some specific customer journey that marketers are trying to push people through, and sometimes they can forget the purpose is to just answer the question and get the customer in a place where they understand what value you can bring to them. And if you just frankly stay true to that, I think your content becomes a lot more extensible and usable across multiple parts of your account-based efforts.
So when I hear a question like this, usually behind it is the idea that we need to have a lot of custom or personalized content in order to execute an account-based approach. And I think one thing that we don't always recognize is that we can customize our personal voices. So I think for this, about the ability to take the exact same piece of content, but personalize in how I present it. Why am I telling somebody that this is relevant to them? And that can be in segment-based approaches in marketing, where I've got a group of accounts that I've put together that are similar enough, same industry, same size, using the same existing solution that I'd like to displace, whatever it might be. And now I can give that as the reason for the content that I'm sharing and why I believe it is valuable to them. Similarly, SDRs have a big role in that personalization. And so they can be using the exact same piece of content, but they can present why it's relevant to the recipient differently each time. And so doing our research allows us oftentimes to look at that idea that so many of us have. We need to tailor and personalize all of our content and recognize that from a more scalable perspective, kind of that midpoint in scalability, oftentimes the right answer is to tailor and personalize in our presentation of that content instead of in the underlying content itself.
Great. I think we can do a few more questions, and we'll send any follow-up answers to people via email. Derek, what are some of the most successful ABM campaigns you've seen?
Well, that's a pretty broad question. I think what drives success with ABM is just persistence and staying committed to the segment of the market that you've identified. And as Eric mentioned, in his section, like locking in and agreeing that we agreed we're going to go and take down this market. So, obviously the creative approach and the content approach is critical to account-based success. That's all determined by the audience you're pursuing and the solution that you have. But the best campaigns are the ones that frankly are persistent and consistent over a longer period of time and aren't too quick to try to change or move on to another segment because the response isn't coming in the way that one might like in the initial days. So over anything else, the commonality of successful customers and campaigns is the ability to be patient and consistent within an approach against a set of accounts where you have a hypothesis that there's a propensity and fit for what you're offering, and to understand that while we hope we can dictate the timeline in the customer's mind, we can only influence that somewhat, and we all are somewhat subject to what's going on in the timings around the customer. And if we're patient, we're much more likely to catch more than if we are trying to be more transactional.
All right, and then we have one last question. Best practices for getting sales and sales dev to understand and support an account-based marketing program.
Derek, do you want that one first? Or you want me to take it?
Yeah, I'll just quickly, Eric. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because this is, and I think we both kind of touched on it in the material too. This is actually what makes or breaks campaigns is making sure that I think for me there's two, making sure that the sales team is aligned and understands what's going on. And it probably for me it focuses on two key areas. One is kind of that market identification, opportunity selection, and account prioritization, work that has to happen at the front end. And then it's also how are we building a system that shares back with the selling organization, what's occurring within those accounts at an account level so they can be smart, intelligent, prioritized with how they interact with the accounts at the right time and with the right context. So, those are really the two key solves, is making sure that the right folks agree and have locked in on the segment we're going to pursue and the reasons why we're going to do it, and that you have a system that enables an easy, fast, reliable transfer of intelligence at an account level that's happening in market back to the sales organization so they understand what's happening, feel like they have the air cover that they need, and understand the way to interact and which customers are most priority versus still cooking. Those are the two big things for me, but I'd love to hear your comments on it too, Eric.
Sure. So a couple things that I want to flag. First is, let's start with what's the big problem. Like, if we don't do this and we aren't successful, what's going to happen that we're not very happy about in our business? Or what's that big opportunity that we're taking on? And too often we start actually with the ICP, but we don't start with the discussion right before, which is, are we trying to do something to dramatically improve expansion and net revenue retention of our top 5% of customers? Or is this about winning in a scalable way in the enterprise segment, which we expect to be key to our growth and is much more focused on new logo? What I'm going to come up with as the list based on that first higher level business objective is vastly different. And so we've seen this a lot more recently, where actually we get started on the list, we get everybody involved, everybody has a different set of problems that they want us to solve for. And we haven't actually just agreed on what are the business challenges we're solving for first in a specific enough way that it lets us say, oh, one, should even all these people be in the room? Like, great, we've got leadership, but then we've got segment leaders, and we're not actually talking about solving for some of those segments in our first go around. Let's get the right team in the room because we've figured out what that real focus is. So that's one of the things that I would flag as something that I've seen recently as a challenge quite a few times. And then the next is, let's make certain that we're jointly creating the best way to accomplish that objective. This is why you will not hear me talk about account-based marketing very often. You'll hear me talk about an account-based strategy or an account-based initiative, because this one in particular breaks down, and the question was, how do I get sales and sales dev on board? When marketing tries to say, this is what we're doing, instead of the organization saying, this is the best way to accomplish that outcome, and using the skill set and the knowledge of sales and sales dev just as much as marketing in putting together that program. So it's not marketing coming up with this thing and saying, this is what we're going to go do. Sales and sales dev, why are you not on board with this? No, we had to create it together. They have to believe in the approach just as much as we do in marketing, or we're going to have that problem.
That's a great point, Eric.
All right, well, that I think just about wraps us up. If you have any persistent questions, feel free to reach out to us at Terminus, and we'd be happy to reply. Thank you for spending your time with us, and have a wonderful day.